Well, good morning, everyone, and I'd like to call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order. My name is Shannon Phillips. I'm the MLA for Lethbridge West and chair of this committee. So as we begin this morning, I think we should first invite those participating in the committee room to identify themselves by way of introduction. I'll start to my right, member.
Garth Rosal, Vermilion, Lloydminster Wainwright.
Good morning, everyone. Cyril Turd, MLA for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Good morning, everyone. Peter Singh, MLA for Calgary East.
Arnold Schmidt, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Marie Renaud, St. Albert.
Good morning, Raki Pencholi, Edmonton Whitemud.
Good morning, Nancy Robert, Clerk of Journals and Committees.
Good morning, Aaron Roth, Committee Clerk.
And we have folks on the line. We have Member Armstrong Humaniak and Mrs. Leela Ahir and Mr. Jordan Walker. And we have one more person joining us in the room. I will just give you a moment to introduce yourselves,
Jackie Lovely, Camrose constituency.
Thank you, Member Lovely. And we do have folks on the line from the Office of the Auditor General. I'm wondering if they can also introduce themselves for the record, please.
Good morning, Doug Wiley.
Good morning, Brad Ireland.
Good morning, folks. And we also are joined by Mr. Devinder Tour, member for Calgary Falcon Ridge, on video conference as well. If there are any others, just send us a message so we can make sure that your presence is noted for the record as we move along here. Friends, we have a few housekeeping items before us. Of course, the usual COVID-19 public health orders apply in this room, and members participating virtually who wish to be placed on a speaker's list are asked to email or send a message in the group chat to the committee clerk as per usual. Members in the room, please signal to the chair, and as always, whether on video or in the room, if there is a point of order, just say so and say it, because I won't necessarily see you, or if I am looking at the video conference, I may not see the people in the room. So just say it, and sometimes you have to say it twice so that we can all hear each other. So thank you for your understanding on that, friends. We'll now move on to item 2, which is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to today's agenda? Seeing none, could a member move that the agenda for the November 30th meeting, and I see Mr. Mr. Singh moving that, that our agenda for today's meeting be approved as distributed. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Friends, we have the minutes from the November 23rd meeting of the committee in front of us. Do members have any errors or omissions to note? Seeing none, will a member move that the minutes of the November 23rd meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts be approved as distributed? I see Member Turton moving that. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That motion is carried. We have guests from the Ministry of Transportation here this morning, my friends. They are here to address the Ministry's annual report of 2020-21 and any outstanding recommendations from the Auditor General. As per our usual practice, to the officials joining us, you have 10 minutes to provide your opening remarks, after which the Auditor General will provide his comments for 5 minutes. Just for the benefit of Hansard, Deputy, when you begin speaking, just introduce yourself, and then if there are any ADMs or Executive Director or other officials joining us, the first time that you speak, if you could say your name and your position for the record, we will let you know if your name is not in the little box underneath, and at which point we'll have you introduce yourself so that Hansard can properly attribute your comments. So with that, Deputy, your time starts when you begin speaking.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Chair. As mentioned, we're with you today to discuss the 2020-2021 annual report for Alberta Transportation. With me today are Ranjit Tharmalingam, Assistant Deputy Minister of Planning, Procurement and Technical Standards, Tom Liu, Assistant Deputy Minister of the Construction and Maintenance Division, Crystal Damer, Assistant Deputy Minister of Safety and Policy, Dale Fung, our Senior Financial Officer, and Lynn Vardy, Executive Director of Safe Roads Alberta. So to start today, I'd like to give you some background about Alberta transportation. Alberta transportation affects each and every Albertan, from High Level to Pincher Creek and Jasper to Lloydminster. With more than 31,000 kilometers of highway, which equals 64,000 lane kilometers when we account for double and triple lane sections of the highway network, everyone uses or depends on services provided by this ministry. Whether it's traveling along our highway network, using public transportation, relying on clean drinking water from modern systems, to depending on the vast array of goods and services that move across our province, Alberta transportation plays an important part in the lives of all Albertans. The core of our mandate is safety, and in fact, it's our number one priority. We work to ensure the safety of those who use our highway network on a daily basis. We have many tools to help us identify safety issues and to respond to them. The department inspects bridges and overpasses on a regular basis to determine if they need repair or, in some cases, replacement. Keeping our highways clear of snow and ice is one of our biggest jobs. Winter, as we all know, comes without fail each year, sometimes earlier than expected, and remains with us sometimes later than we'd like. During the winter months, which runs roughly from October to April, we have more than 600 plows across the province clearing the way and making our roads safe. Our highway maintenance crews do a great job for Albertans, sometimes under very trying circumstances. That brings me to the business at hand of our annual report. We had expenses of $1.62 billion, which includes operating costs, grants to municipalities, amortization of capital assets, and the use of salt, sand, and gravel over winter. We had invested $1.53 billion on capital projects that enhanced the provincial highways and water management infrastructures. The Southwest Calgary Ring Road project was delivered using the public-private partnership method known as P3. Our work is based on 6 desired outcomes reflected in the annual report, which are competitiveness, market access, and economic growth. So our guiding principles are ensuring that Alberta has a safe and efficient transportation system to support a diversified economy. Long-term sustainability and affordability is our next goal. This is to ensure Alberta can afford to maintain its existing transportation assets and invest in new strategic infrastructure. Third is our goal for connected and active communities. This ensures Albertans have inclusive and accessible transportation options between and through communities. 4, as mentioned earlier, a key priority for us is safety and security. We work to ensure our transportation network is safe and secure. We do this through education, regulatory, technological, and infrastructure improvements. 5th is our goal for innovation and technology integration. We work to make sure our transportation system can adapt to new innovations and technologies. And last, but certainly not least, is environmental stewardship. We need to do our part by managing our transportation system in an environmentally responsible and sustainable manner. As we started 2020, Alberta transportation, like everyone else in the province and across the world, had to pivot and shift priorities as COVID-19 began to sweep across the province. Early in this pandemic, it became very obvious that keeping the supply chain open and operating quickly and efficiently was our main focus. We knew that commercial carriers were vital to make this happen. They had to have the ability to continue to transport goods between Canada and the United States. We worked in collaboration with the Alberta Motor Transport Association, otherwise known as AMTA, and others to understand what we needed to keep carriers on the road. We worked with the Government of Canada and other provinces to ensure borders stayed open, and the Alberta government added COVID-19 screening at our border crossings. We worked with our partners to develop a list of essential goods and services to help commercial carriers know what they could transport under the provincial and federal COVID-19 response. One of our first acts was to acknowledge the important role truck drivers play in moving essential goods. To support the efficient movement of goods in and out of Alberta, we eliminated the requirement for truckers to quarantine for 14 days when they came back into Canada from the US. To support our truckers, we worked with the AMTA and the Canadian Trucking Alliance to quickly make sure restaurants, truck stops, washrooms, and other necessary amenities remained available to them in their endeavors. The next priority for the Government of Alberta was to look at our permits and regulations to ensure that they were not an impediment to continuing to have commercial carriers flow through the network. We worked with municipalities to ease some noise, time of delivery, and other bylaws that would otherwise normally be in place to ensure, again, the smooth operation of commercial carriers during this critical time. and we made sure their insurance didn't expire in the middle of the pandemic. We adjusted some of our own regulations around hours of driving, paperwork, and other areas that would, as I mentioned earlier, keep carriers moving but not affect safety on our highways. In addition to ensuring the efficient movement of goods and services in the province, Alberta Transportation played a major role in supporting the economic recovery program, creating and supporting jobs by accelerating many highway maintenance and construction projects. We allocated more than $400 million in capital maintenance and renewal to jumpstart more than 100 projects to maintain and improve the condition of our highways. We also identified a number of strategic capital projects that we could advance to support the economic recovery plan. These included twinning Highway 3 between Taber and Burdett, twinning Highway 11 between Sylvan Lake and Rocky Mountain House, construction of a new eastbound bridge over the Bow River on Stony Trail in Calgary, and we started work to widen a 36-kilometer stretch of highway south of Grand Cache. We also approved $120 million for the City of Edmonton's Terwilliger Drive expansion project. The pandemic also resulted in suspension of all driving road tests, causing delays in Albertans' ability to get a license. We came up with an innovative method to ensure we could resume testing, in particular for Class 1 drivers. As a result, between April 30th and June 30th, we conducted 82 remote Class 1 road tests and 55 drivers successfully completed their tests. To address concerns about having enough qualified truck drivers and to support unemployed Albertans, we implemented a driving back to work program with funding of $3 million in 2020-21. Through this program, unemployed Albertans are able to access this funding to complete the mandatory entry-level training needed to earn a Class 1 license. We approved 300 applicants and 249 people completed the program in 2020-21, and more than half reported that they found a job within 3 months of completing the program. I'm proud of our department staff for meeting the challenges created by the pandemic and responding in a timely manner, in particular to make sure store shelves were stocked in the early stages of the pandemic. In addition, the department improved driver testing for all classes of driver license. In January of 2021, we launched a new and more efficient road test system that allowed us to complete more than 270,000 road tests, essentially eliminating the prior backlog. Maintaining a safe highway is a critical priority, as I've mentioned a couple times. Fatalities and major injury collisions were reduced in 2020-21. The combined result of fatal and major injury collisions rate was 48 per 100,000 of the population. That's below the target of 54 and below the previous year rate of 53.3. For this reporting period, we can tell you that the percentage of roads rated in poor condition worsened only slightly, while 84.3% of the highway network was rated in fair or good condition. The department is continuing its focus on maintaining the existing highway network in alignment with recommendations from the McKinnon panel. The department's 2020-21 capital investments included $487.4 million for capital maintenance and renewal. More than $793 million was allocated to Calgary and Edmonton ring roads, with much of that funding dedicated to the Calgary ring road. In October 2020, many of you will know that we opened a portion of the southwest section of the Calgary ring road, which will accommodate traffic volumes for the next 30 years with an estimated 100,000 vehicles per day capacity along some sections. The section from Sarcee Trail to Fish Creek Boulevard opened to traffic in October 2020, and the remaining section opened to traffic in October of this year. On the City of Edmonton's Anthony Henday, there is continued progress towards the expansion of the southwest portion of Anthony Henday Drive. As we move forward, we continue to explore new and innovative ways of financing major projects with minimal impacts on tax dollars. Last year, we introduced the Financing Alberta Strategic Transportation Act, otherwise known as FAST, to allow for the use of tolls to fund major infrastructure projects. This allows government to expedite select projects that provide economic benefits. Revenues from these fees will be used only to recover the cost of the new infrastructure, and fees will be dropped once the project has been paid. The first project under consideration is the construction of a bridge over the Athabasca River on Highway 697 near La Crete to replace the aging ferry system there. In March 2020, we introduced Safe Roads Alberta, a new adjudication branch, which allows drivers to deal with their impaired driving manner and through an administrative and efficient system. This initiative was implemented as part of the broader Justice Transformation Initiative to increase capacity of the justice system, creating a simple, fast, fair, and efficient adjudication system. The new branch hit the ground quickly.
Thank you, Deputy. We'll now move to the Auditor General for his comments. Mr. Wiley, you have 5 minutes.
Well, good morning, Chair, committee members, and Ministry Management. It's great to be with you again today. I'll take just a couple of minutes to highlight our outstanding recommendations relating to the ministry, and then I'll briefly summarize the auditing of financial transactions that we perform at the ministry. So this past June, we made 2 recommendations to the ministry. Both result from our audit of the ministry processes to provide information about government's environmental liabilities. Our first recommendation was for the ministry to improve its processes to assess, estimate, and account for environmental liabilities. The second recommendation was that the ministry improve processes to ensure compliance with environmental legislation. Now, these recommendations result from our audit findings relating to the reclamation of sand and gravel pits and highway maintenance yards for which the ministry is responsible. As is customary, Chair, we'll complete our follow-up work when management asserts that the recommendations have been implemented. Now, consistent with other ministries, we audit financial transactions at the department as part of our audit of the consolidated financial statements of the province. In addition, we conducted a separate audit of the financial statements of the Alberta Transportation and Safety Board. The results of that audit were that we were able to issue a clean audit opinion on those financial statements, and that was for the period ended March 31, 2021. We do include in our auditor's report an emphasis of matter paragraph highlighting the dissolution of the board on March 31st. Chair, there are no outstanding recommendations relating to our audit work at the board. That concludes my opening comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. So we'll now move on to our first rotation, which is, of course, we're in an in-session schedule, so we will have 12 minutes, our first rotation beginning with the official opposition. I am seeing Member Schmidt.
Great. Thank you, Chair. My first questions are about the Calgary Green Line project, which is referenced on page 29 of the annual report. As Calgarians know well, the project was significantly delayed by the province so that it could undertake additional due diligence. On December 7th, 2020, then Mayor Nenshi expressed frustration with the provincial government, noting that it had been 6 months since the provincial report was commissioned, but the information and the report hadn't been shared with the city. So my first question is, why did the government not share the report with the city?
Thank you very much for that question. Sorry for my delay as I hit all the correct buttons. So we worked through a technical working group between ourselves and the city to go over the significant areas of the review, to work through those at a working group level. So the broader report wasn't fully required in order for us to convey to the city what the findings in the report were and the work we needed to do to conclude the review.
So help me understand this. There is a committee struck that consisted of members from both the Department of Transportation and the City of Calgary. You generated a report, but the City of Calgary couldn't see the report even though they were on the committee? Is my understanding correct here? Or?
No, so the report was generated previously through the department, and we shared the germane recommendations from that report with the city as part of our working group. So they were fully aware of the items that we wanted to work through in terms of the review.
Yeah, unbelievable that the City of Calgary was actually involved with generating a report, but they couldn't even see the own report that they worked on, and that you only submitted germane recommendations. It's no wonder that Mayor Nenshi expressed frustration with that process. That same day on December 7th, 2020, the minister, through his press secretary, said that the province wouldn't be held to a, and I quote, arbitrary timeline. The press secretary refused to answer media questions about increased costs due to the delay. But fortunately, that's what Public Accounts Committee is here for, is to ask these kinds of questions and hopefully get answers. So as of December 7th, 2020, what was the estimated cost increase to the Green Line project due to the delay that the provincial government imposed on it?
So through the course of the review, and you may know that the work on the green line, the revised alignment that resulted from the review actually resulted in some work that was contemplated later in the original project. So that work was brought forward. So the review itself did not result in a substantial delay to the project overall. What was contemplated was advancing some of the work that in the original project proposal was set to be undertaken in a subsequent phase of the project. The province was interested in ensuring that the first phase of the project would ensure a connection into downtown and not end south of the river. So in fact, although the project timelines appear to have been extended through the review, some of that is a reflection of the more complicated work of working through the downtown core being advanced into the first part of the project.
So I guess the delays that you say that have occurred are apparently figments of my imagination. That's quite frustrating, but my original question was about cost increases. So on March 31st, 2021, the City of Calgary estimated that due to the postponement of provincial funding, the Green Line LRT project would be delayed significantly by a year, and the city estimated that the delays were costing $1.5 million a month for the first segment of the line. I'm interested to know what the ministry's estimated cost of the delay is, per month, per year.
So in terms of the increased project costs, a number of those increases were related to actually fine-tuning estimates in that more complicated downtown section that wasn't part of the original project plan. So a number of those costs just reflect the advancement of more complex work being brought forward, and as any project of that nature that's quite complicated, estimates are refined and fine-tuned to better understand what they may be. So we didn't attribute...
I appreciate the Deputy Minister giving me a great deal of context and talking about refinements and so on, but she's avoiding giving me a number, Madam Chair. I'm wondering what the Deputy Minister's... what is the department's estimate for the cost of the delays to the Green Line? Is it $1.5 million a month, as the City of Calgary has stated? Is it more? Is it less? Just give us a number. That's what I'm looking for here.
I don't have a specific number relating to an estimate of the cost of our review in terms of the delay. We can endeavor to bring back to the committee if we have further estimates that would quantify the overall extension of the project.
So just for my clarity, you don't have anything at hand, or the department didn't generate anything?
We don't have a cost at hand related to the cost of the review.
Well, I certainly appreciate the Deputy Minister committing to table that cost to the committee. Now, I guess in relation to the Green Line project, we've seen a significant rise in inflation with the price of everything going up. Did the ministry conduct any estimate of the inflationary cost increases because of the lost construction season?
So the city actually revised all of the costs related to the project overall. The early construction season was intended to do some early earthworks and utility moving. Some of that was anticipated to continue, and others may not have relied on some of those broader construction materials in the early phases.
I'm extremely frustrated, Madam Chair. It seems like the questions that I'm asking are not getting through the Deputy Minister because she's answering something that I didn't ask. I'm asking the Deputy Minister if the Department of Transportation did any analysis of what impact inflation would have on the cost of the Green Line project.
So we accepted and worked through the estimates provided by the City of Calgary on the estimates they had with their project. They also had other independent reviewers of their cost estimates.
Can you share those cost estimates with the committee?
I will take back to determine if and what we can share. Those estimates are actually in the purview of Calgary.
Thank you very much. The chair of the Green Line Committee talked about the new red tape impacting the project from the province, and he labeled it, and I quote, the UCP effect, end quote. He went on to note that the result was increased delays and increased costs. Can the ministry share their projection for when the project will be completed and what the total cost increase will be from provincial changes and mandates?
Thank you for that. I may turn this over to Ranjit Tharmalingam. However, just to provide some early information on your question, as I mentioned before, the costs really were largely a reflection of refined estimates for a complex project of this nature. So, Ranjit, can you provide further information on the timeline and the overall costs?
So the original business case, oh, by the way, the Ranjit Dharmalingam, ADM, Transportation. So when we started working with the City of Calgary folks in terms of addressing the concern identified through the review, the review, then we have identified procurement strategy, cost estimate, and contingencies to be addressed. And as Calgary, because it's their project, they have decided to go with a procurement strategy of having as a one project, including downtown and all the way to Shepherd, that the revised timelines Calgary provided through their business case is in fiscal year 2030. So that is the revised completion date in the business case, which the province has since approved and submitted to federal government for consideration.
I have heard multiple times now refined cost estimates, and yet nobody from the department has given me a number. Make something up if you don't know. Just give me a number. How much did the increase? How much did the Green Line project increase in costs due to the provincial government's delays to the project?
Well, what we can tell you is that the total project cost under the Infrastructure Canada's program, where the province is contributing 1.53 billion, is the total cost of 4.65 billion. And that cost has not changed. What Calgary has indicated after the review jointly done with the province and them to address those concerns, that they are now able to, within that 4.65 billion, which includes 1.53 billion for the province, from the province, and 1.53 billion from the federal government, will be now able to take that project from Shepherd, southeast, to Eau Claire station. And then once that contract is completed, if there is any savings comes out of that contract, the board has decided to review to extend it to 16th Avenue. So the total cost of the Green Line project remains at 4.65 billion.
Thank you. I appreciate at least hearing a number. Unfortunately, we've run out my time, so I think I'll just talk for the next 3 seconds and then turn it over to members of the government caucus for their questions.
Alrighty then, we'll go over to the first rotation, the government side, for 12 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to express my appreciation to the representative of the Transportation Ministry for being with us today, as well as the Office of Auditor General. My question is about the COVID-19 response of the ministry, red tape reduction, and road rehabilitation. And as one could expect, the pandemic has been one of the main topics of the annual reports from the 2020-2021 year. Transportation is somewhat different than the ministries we have had with us so far this fall. But I would like to start by asking how the ministry supported the pandemic response.
Thank you so much for that question. I'll focus my answer in a couple of different areas. First, I'll talk a little bit about the pandemic response as it relates to economic recovery, and then I'll talk a little bit about what the department did in terms of supporting necessary industry through the pandemic and adjusting some of our programs. So to support job creation and economic recovery, and I mentioned some of this in my earlier speaking notes, but I'll just give a few more details. So we did have more than 400 million in capital maintenance and renewal to support acceleration of 109 projects across the province that serve to maintain and improve the condition of our network. We had $60 million allocated for pothole repairs and other critical safety measures that would prevent potholes from forming. $200 million was provided in grant funding to communities through the department's Strategic Transportation Infrastructure, otherwise known as Stip program, and our water grant programs to fund municipal bridge improvements, upgrades to roads and community airports, and water projects. And this supported approximately 1,800 jobs. We had more than 480 million of new capital construction projects, including a number of the highway projects I mentioned in my opening remarks, and including that 120 million towards the Terwilliger expansion project in Edmonton. In terms of driver safety initiatives, we certainly were the first jurisdiction to restart safe testing for driver's licensing with a focus on those critical driver's license needed during the pandemic, including emergency responders and commercial carriers. We adjusted our Safe Roads Alberta adjudication branch to ensure that people who were in that process and wanted to have a review of their sanction could be still dealt with within our 30-day time frame by adjusting how we did our hearings. So as mentioned earlier, I would like to also comment on how we adjusted some of our internal programs in other ways to help support industry. We did establish a COVID-19 advisory panel. We worked in conjunction with two of our main stakeholders, being the Alberta Road Builders and Heavy Construction Association and the Consulting Engineers of Alberta. And this was done, so there was a lot of concern about what, if any, impacts may be to projects or constructions by virtue of companies being impacted or crews being impacted by an outbreak of the pandemic, potentially in their crews that are working on particular projects. And so working in conjunction with them, we established a COVID-19 advisory panel that would allow a panel made up of 3 members, one from the department, one from each of those representative organizations, to essentially hear the claim and make a recommendation to the minister. I'm happy to say that we've been very successful, in fact, at resolving any issues that have happened so far, to the extent that we have not yet had one have to go to this COVID-19 advisory panel, although it was very much appreciated by industry that we would go to the extent to establish a body to deal with any concerns that they may have. We also accelerated, as you can imagine, with the influx of the stimulus program projects, which essentially represented a doubling of the work that transportation would normally do in a year. We were able to review our contract processes and get rid of some redundancies and some inefficiencies, and tender all of those projects in a much shorter period of time, so that contractors were able to start many of them in that year. I mentioned our innovative Class 1 road testing and the steps we took to make sure we could be the first jurisdiction to restart our road tests, which we did successfully and have continued to operate successfully despite the ongoing pandemic and the different protocols that have been at play. We've worked closely with our highway maintenance contractors to establish a COVID-19 contingency plan for winter maintenance, and that will help us address any situations where a particular crew in an area of the province may be impacted by an outbreak of COVID, and how we might handle that to ensure that roads are continued to be maintained as they are required through the more dangerous winter months. And certainly we placed a lot of emphasis on how we would support the carrier industry as well. And I mentioned a few, and I'll just summarize that we went to great extent to ensure that we exempted commercial carriers from a number of bylaws and other regulations we have in place to make sure they could keep rolling. We went to great efforts to establish additional amenities along the highway at various locations, so they had a place to stop and a washroom to use when early on various restaurants that they normally had relied on were closing. And then we worked with the commercial food industry to help keep some of those businesses operating to serve those carriers as they were moving along. And we reduced the need for a number of internal things that we would normally have just by extending some timelines for their normal certification. Not to a great extent. They would have recently already completed some of their normal certification with us, and we just gave people a bit of a window of time through the height of the pandemic to not have to deal with some of that those administrative items in the short term. And so we did that all with a view to supporting industry and not compromising safety.
Thank you for such a detailed answer. And on page 31 of the annual report, the graphic for performance indicator 3.B shows the use of transit from 2015 to 2019. Is the data for 2020 available at this time? And if so, how did the pandemic impact ridership?
Yes, thank you for that question. So this indicator, as you mentioned, describes the change of ridership for all conventional transit service across Alberta. So we use this number reported annually from the Canadian Urban Transit Association, otherwise known as CUTA, and for the province of Alberta as it pertains to regular passenger trips. So the data actually does lag by 1 year. So the impact of COVID-19 isn't immediately evident in these numbers. Results for this indicator are collected by calendar year, and the latest data set is from 2019, so just prior to the pandemic. So while the 2020 data is not currently available, it's anticipated when they are available, we do expect to see a reduction in the ridership across the province.
Thank you for answering. And another theme throughout the annual report has been on red tape reduction. Page 13 of the annual report outlines the initiatives the ministry took to reduce red tape, particularly by eliminating certain type of permits. Can the ministry provide more detail on what type of permits these were and what benefits were realized in 2020, 2021 by eliminating them?
Sure, thank you for that question. So as part of our ongoing efforts to reduce red tape, as you mentioned, we did reduce the number of permits required. That was approximately 10,000 permits were taken out of the system. So generally what happens is, our regulations have been long-standing, and so we have a number of situations where carrier commercial load or vehicle configuration required certain permits. As we've discovered through experience in the last number of years, as industry and as technology and vehicle configurations evolve and become a new industry standard, we were essentially requiring people to apply for permits that we would always approve. And so to remove these permits was the right thing to do to support industry, so they no longer had to go through those hoops in order to go through a permit application process that was ultimately going to result in an approval.
Again, thank you for answering. And on page 30 notes that eliminating these outdated permits improve the safety of our roads. Obviously, safety on our roads is paramount. So can the ministry explain how it monitored the effects of these changes to ensure they had the desired impact?
Sure. So as I mentioned in my prior answer, a lot of this work was focused on removing permits that would reflect keeping up with the evolution of better, more improved equipment and not requiring permits for people to operate that equipment. So for example, there's been an evolution in the size and placement of side view mirrors on commercial vehicles that our original regulations didn't reflect because the equipment has changed over time. And so essentially by eliminating permits related to things like that, we were able to really facilitate carriers equipping their vehicles with those new industry standards that are geared to improve safety. So certainly we have no expectation that there would be a reduction in safety. But again, this has just occurred in the last year. So substantive improvements would be yet to be calculated.
Thanks for the answer. To continue with the theme of safety throughout the annual report, rehabilitation of road is mentioned numerous times. Alberta's weather and the traffic generated by our industries certainly have an impact on the condition of our roads. But I'm wondering if the ministry can provide some insight into road rehabilitation.
Sure, thank you. I will provide some context and I may ask my technical experts on road rehabilitation to weigh in. But essentially when the road surface condition becomes poor or defective, resurfacing work is needed to restore the pavement surface to the required level of service. So the driving surface may become worn or damaged over time due to aging, weather. We know we have a freeze-thaw cycle in Alberta.
Thank you, Deputy. We'll now go to the official opposition. Member Pancholi, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Deputy, for being here today and all the ministry staff. I'm going to ask some specific questions about some projects. In particular, I'm going to begin my questions about Highway 3 bridge replacement in Lethbridge. So during the fiscal year in question, can the ministry tell us how much was spent on that Highway 3 bridge replacement?
Sure, thank you very much for that question. And I will ask Assistant Deputy Minister Tom Liu to take the project questions.
Thank you. I'm Tom Liu, Assistant Deputy Minister of Construction and Maintenance Division. So just so I can clarify your question, are you referring to the Old Man River Bridge on Highway 3?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay. So we completed some rehabilitation work on that bridge structure, I believe in 2018. So that rehabilitation work has extended the life of that structure for about 10 to 15 years. So with respect to the fiscal year 2020, 2021, I think you had asked how much we spent. We would have just spent funding on routine maintenance. So that would have included things like snow and ice control, line painting, and any kind of pothole type work.
Thank you. Can you just maybe table for the committee how much was spent on that routine work, as well as any safety analysis that was done on this bridge during this fiscal year?
So we wouldn't have done any additional safety analysis. As you're probably aware, there are longer term plans to replace that bridge and provide a wider bridge. So with the existing remaining life of the bridge structure, we're in a situation where we're just continuing to do that routine maintenance and ensure that it's operating safely.
So thank you. Just if there are any safety analysis, I understand on that bridge in particular, the on and off ramps are considered sort of too short and that there's a bit of a safety issue. So if there are any safety analysis that are done on that issue, the on and off ramps, if you could table that with the committee, you don't need to, maybe just take that away to look at and decide on. So, in terms of replacing this bridge, as of March 31st, 2021, what stage were you in terms of the design, bid and build process for actually replacing the bridge?
So as I had mentioned earlier, we were expecting the remaining life of that structure to be 10 to 15 years. So we have done the planning work for the replacement structure, but we have not yet commenced the detailed design and the tender package preparation. So that work would typically be done a little bit closer to the period where we had initiate the replacement construction work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So can you table or endeavor to take away to table with this committee any record of correspondence between the City of Lethbridge or Economic Development Lethbridge with your ministry about the Highway 3 project during the fiscal year in question?
Will do, thank you.
Thank you. And then, as we know, this bridge and the replacement of the bridge was actually promised by the Premier in 2019. So is there anywhere in these financial statements evidence, I suppose, of that replacement being funded? Is there any evidence of that in the financial statements in question?
No.
Okay. So then, as you mentioned, you begin maybe the planning process. You're not really into the design and build stage and bid stage of the project. But can you table with this committee any costing or other analysis of the anticipated the replacement project and any projections about how those costs may have increased since 2019? And any record of projections of cost increase into the future that you may have undertaken last year?
Yes, we can do that. But when you say cost increase, could you maybe elaborate on that? Our typical process is to replace our infrastructure at the end of its service life. So and we do rehabilitation work, we do regular maintenance work, and all of these activities are intended to extend the life of our infrastructure to maximize of its life and get the longest value out of it. So
yeah, thank you. Sorry to interrupt. I just in interest of time, I'm just seeking clarification because the Premier promised in 2019 that this bridge would be replaced. So imagine some sort of at least high-level cost analysis was done of what it would cost to replace the bridge in 2019. You're saying that the department's under the impression that it's only going to replace it when the life of the bridge wears out, so that there was no, I guess, action taken by the Premier in 2019 to actually initiate that replacement sooner. Is that correct?
That is correct. So with the estimated remaining life of that structure being 10 to 15 years, we would not have commenced any replacement activities at that time.
Okay.
Until it's closer to the time of replacement of the bridge.
Okay, well then thank you. I'll just ask you then to go back and endeavor to table any cost analysis that may have been done in 2019. I understand the Premier or the Minister at the time indicated there was a cost analysis and table that. And then if there have been any updates to what the costs to replace it have been when were made in the last fiscal year, if you could table that. I'll just leave that with you, Assistant Deputy Minister, to take back and see if those documents exist and to table them with the committee. I'd like to move on. Thank you. So this past year, Lethbridge City Council ran a referendum on building a third bridge in Lethbridge inside city limits, connecting the south side to the growing west side of Lethbridge. The now mayor, who was on council last year, supported this third bridge, and he indicated publicly that there was provincial funding available for building this third bridge. And one would assume if he's saying there's provincial funding, he would have gotten that from Alberta Transportation. But I don't see any planning funds in the annual reports of the financial statements before us. So can you tell us how much provincial funding was promised during the 2020-21 fiscal year to Lethbridge for a third bridge?
So
I'm sorry, ADM Lou, we have a point of order on the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, under 23B, I mean, the committee's intended focus is the administration of policy, not the merits or the development of that policy. The member Cross has already clearly stated that the information she's seeking isn't in the actual documents. It's more of the development in terms of policy platforms and campaign commitments. So I think that this is clearly over the line about what is acceptable here at public accounts.
Thank you.
Well, if my friend, Member Turton, had actually listened to the question that my friend, Ms. Pancholi, had posed, she was asking about planning funds for a third bridge in Lethbridge. Now, everybody has the annual report in front of them. It doesn't break down by every single project the amount of money that the Department of Transportation spent. I think my friend from Edmonton Whitemud is perfectly within her rights to ask for more details about how the department spent its money in the fiscal year 2020-2021, which is exactly what she was doing. And this is therefore not a point of order.
Thank you for that to both sides. I think at this point, if we are asking about where we might find money that was spent or money that was committed or money that has been projected within that fiscal year, within those bounds. And because there are many, many instances in which it says, oh, there were 70 projects that were approved for capital maintenance and renewal, but they're not enumerated, for example, in that fiscal year. So as long as we're staying within those bounds of were planning funds advanced, is there a record of correspondence, are there any financial commitments that we can find anywhere, then I think we're in bounds. And we can get a quick answer and move on.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'll just reiterate my question. Are there any planning funds allocated within the fiscal year of 2020-21 for the building of a third bridge in Lethbridge?
So Tom Liu, Assistant Deputy Minister of Construction and Maintenance, and the answer to that question is no. This third bridge that you're referring to within the city of Lethbridge is on their local road system. So I believe this proposed bridge is not on the provincial highway system.
Okay, so therefore there is no provincial, as far as you know, there is no provincial funding associated with any building of a third bridge then in Lethbridge.
That's correct.
Thank you. Correct. I appreciate that. I'll move on to, I've just got a short period of time left. I want to ask about rural bus service between Lethbridge and Medicine Hat. We know that this, when Greyhound wound down its Western Canadian routes, many rural Albertans were left without that service. In the fiscal year in question, the Southern Alberta Rural Bus Program cost about $415,000 as an operating grant and $21,000 per month, not a huge amount of money. That service was suspended during the pandemic and early in the fiscal year, but then it was canceled outright in Northern and Southern Alberta at the end of the fiscal year. So I want to just assess whether or not the ministry did any analysis about any other lower cost services before canceling the service. We know many rural Albertans, particularly between Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, are using that right now to access the medical appointments. Was any analysis done by the ministry to actually assess any other options to ensure these Albertans have service?
Hi, thank you very much for that question. So my understanding that the province did not cancel that project. It was canceled by the municipality for ridership. So what I can tell you is we certainly had the rural bus pilot in place over the last couple of years. Clearly, COVID has impacted ridership through the course of the last year and a half in terms of impacting those projects. That particular pilot project, the last of those pilots was operating into this fall, and we will be doing an overall assessment of those. What I can say in terms of rural bus transportation throughout the province, and I know this has been somewhat of an ongoing concern, beginning from when Greyhound withdrew from the market.
Thank you, Deputy. And we'll now move on to the second rotation, government side, 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the key programs that the ministry administers is the Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Program, also known as Stip. This program is very important for rural and small urban communities as the roads and bridge infrastructure in these communities often suffers from disrepair. One exciting project that received Stip funding was the resurfacing of the Camrose Community Airport runway. The airport is very important to my community because the farmers rely on it to service their crop dusters and other small aircraft that are vital to their operations, especially during years with high levels of precipitation. Turning to the mechanics of Stip, page 20 of the annual report notes that $15 million in grants were allocated for the program in 2020-2021. Can the ministry please explain what criteria was used to determine which projects received Stip funding in 2020-2021?
Sure, thank you so much for that question. So the ministry first determines whether the projects meet the goals of the Stip program overall. And so these include improving accessibility and the movement of goods and people, increasing the capacity of municipal transportation infrastructure in order to support economic growth, enhancing safety and efficiency, and extending the service life of key transportation infrastructure. So from that criteria, then we look at projects and they're rated on a province-wide basis, competitive basis, and evaluated on a variety of metrics that include basic need, safety, functionality, current condition of the infrastructure, as well as the economic, social, environmental, and innovation benefits that the project may provide.
Thank you so much for the answer. How many applicants were there for STIP funding last fiscal year, and how did the rejected application get treated?
So there were 187 applications for funding last year. 52 were recommended for approval. And so, as you know, it's a very popular program. It does a lot of good across the province to assist municipalities in their critical infrastructure needs as well. And so applicants are always advised that they are able to reapply the subsequent year if they weren't approved in a current year.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Did the ministry provide any oversight over STIP funding once it had been awarded to a project to ensure that funds were used efficiently and effectively?
Sure. So we work in concert with the municipalities through the administration of the grant funding that is approved to them for any particular project. And so we work really hand in glove to determine the progress of those projects. And so we ensure funds are being used efficiently and make payments on progress as part of our oversight.
And just to change direction a little bit, on page 18 of the annual report, there's more exciting news for my constituency. There is a very busy, important bypass that's being built on Highway 834. That's near Toefield. Can the ministry provide an update on the progress that has been made on this project in 2020-2021?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So construction of the Highway 83 realignment near Toefield, as you referenced, was completed in 2021. So it was a 2-year, $20 million project starting in 2020, and the new highway was open to traffic fall of 2021. So the new alignment to the east of town will certainly reduce congestion and delays for industry and other highway users, as I'm sure you're probably more aware and familiar with than I am, while also separating industry and other highway users from local vehicle and pedestrian traffic. So it is really anticipated this project will increase traffic safety and the peace and quiet for the benefit of the Toefield residents.
Highway 834 is considered a high-load corridor, meaning that the bypass will divert oversized loads around the community. Was there a mechanism that the ministry used to ensure that areas designated as high-load or similar designations were prioritized for upgrades?
Sure. So we have criteria metrics that we apply as we assess every project across the province every year. And so the criteria that we assess projects against include the economic impact it may have, the safety impact it may realize, the social impact, cost-benefit analysis, and of course, last but not least, what environmental impact the project may have. So within those, although we don't have a specific criteria labeled as high-load designation project by its very nature would fall under assessment in the economic impact category.
Okay. And specifically as it pertains to Highway 834, how did the ministry ensure that this project was on track?
So we do with this project, along with all of our others, we include a variety of incentives and penalties to make sure that contractors complete their projects on budget and on time. So we have an engineering consultant. It's the ministry site representative for construction projects, and they work closely with the contractor and the ministry officials to manage projects according to timelines and budget. So we have regular project reporting, contract and specifications, and this tri-party partnering system that I've described. That includes the ministry representative, the engineering consultant, as well as the construction contractor. So we actively use all of these tools that I've described to ensure projects are well managed and delivered on time and within budget.
Thank you. That's the end of my questions. I'll cede to the next member.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Transportation is a ministry where the dollar spent is very tangible in the sense that the roads and bridges affect all Albertans in a significant way. With that in mind, I want to ask you a few questions on the ministry's financial highlights on pages 53 and 54. The impact of the pandemic were felt by virtually every corner of the globe. I assume transportation was no different. So I want to start off my questions on the financial highlights by asking how the pandemic impacted the ministry's revenues and spending. So in that vein, on page 53 and 54 of the annual report, it's clear that the ministry received far less revenue than expected. Can the ministry provide more details on why revenue was so much lower than expected?
Sure, thank you so much for that question. So you are correct. We had less revenue, 361.4 million less in revenue compared to budget in the 2020-21 fiscal year. So this was primarily a reflection of lower cash requirements needed by municipalities due to slower project on their or progress on their projects. So as you may know, that we also administer a number of other grant funding that flows through to municipalities, as well as the programs that the ministry administers directly. And so we flow funds through to those projects according to progress. So if progress is slowed, that results in a lower amount coming from the federal government as revenue to flow through to the municipality for payment on those projects.
Okay. So how did that impact your overall projects for 2021?
So in general, these ones that we're talking about, they're associated with federal revenue. They would relate to grant funding that's provided to municipalities. And so, but I would also say that while the pandemic certainly had an impact on potential slowing of projects for, construction companies or contractors that were adopting new measures to deal with COVID protocols, it's also not unusual for projects to progress at different rates than initially intended. So as long as the grant funding that was required to continue the project, we just adjust the cash flows accordingly to manage towards the progress of the project.
Okay. Can the minister provide some more general details on why the actual expenditure was higher than budgeted in 2020, 2021 in certain areas? More specifically, can the ministry explain why the traffic safety services were higher than budgeted for last fiscal year? It was about the same as the previous year, but then you budgeted less and then spent about the same all over again. So if we can just get some explanation as to why that happened. Well, I'll catch you next time.
Thank you, Member Roswell. Moving over now to the opposition side for our third rotation. 9 minutes for Member Renault, please, to start.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my questions are going to be focused on outcome 3, indicators A and B. So Canadian Urban Transit Association tells us that the number of seniors in Canada is set to grow to about 10 million, with 45% of those seniors over 75 having mobility disabilities. So CUDA also estimates that specialized transit, for example, the transit systems that we see in Lethbridge, St. Albert, is almost 8 times more expensive than the same trip on conventional transit, but is cost effective in terms of the savings related to the cost of collisions, the cost of home care. Now, reminder, context, that income supports for seniors and disabled Albertans have been de-indexed. So my question is, for the Ministry of Transportation planning purposes, how many Albertans currently require specialized transit? And by that, I don't mean low-floor buses, I mean handy bus and paratransit.
Thank you very much for that question. I'm not sure that is information that I certainly don't have that information at hand right now. I could endeavor to table it with the understanding that transit systems are operated and owned by municipalities. And so I'm not sure the extent to which I will be able to gather that information, but I will endeavor to do so.
Mm-hmm. So I do understand that that this ministry is reliant on CUDA for some of their information, but I would suggest that the ministry would have a good idea of how many Albertans require this service. And so there has got to be some sort of benchmark, at least, that the ministry is using when they're deciding where to make investments. So, okay, well, let me go back to this comment. So in the annual report on page 47, I note that Alberta CUDA members have reported that nearly all conventional transit routes are designated low-floor buses. So can you tell me, what does nearly all mean?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. I will ask my ADM, Ranjit Thermalingam, to talk about our transit systems, our support to them, and what sorts of needs are accommodated by them.
So these are Ranjit Medium from Transportation. So these data are something that we get from CUDA, Canadian Urban Transit Association. And when we say a majority of them, it's basically the data that we receive from them. So we don't have any specific information as to how many of those are low flow buses versus other types, but these are all just information that we receive and then we were able to translate. So if you need further details of it, we'll have to get more breakdown for you. We don't have that right now.
Maybe I could clarify. So outcome 3 of this ministry is to create connected and active communities, inclusive and accessible transportation. So what I see in the annual report are nearly all buses are low floor, so we don't really know how many. There's no idea about how many Albertans with mobility issues that we are trying to support right now. We have no idea into the future how many we have. We've got like 690,000 seniors right now. That will likely double in 20 years. But this ministry has no idea of the needs in terms of mobility, accessible and inclusive transportation. There's no idea of where we are and where we're going in terms of need.
No. I think what we are saying is, as the Deputy Minister has indicated, these transit systems are operated individually by municipalities. We work with them closely when they provide their needs, and we certainly work with federal government in terms of funding. So, it originates, the requests come from the municipalities. We certainly work with them to address those. So, if we are specifically asking how many handicapped transit passengers would require that is something we'll have to dig deep into the data before we can provide that.
Well, if you could dig deep into the data and table any information that would shed some light on my questions, that would be appreciated. So I'm wondering if you could tell me, what is the total capital investment to specialized transportation in Alberta in this fiscal year that we're covering?
We have the expenditure in terms of transit that we have spent, but specific to we did say disabled Albertans, we don't have that immediately to give it to us. So we can provide this to you later on as a tabled item.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to move on into rural busing. So I'd like to talk about, again, desired outcome 3, where you note that Albertans should have access to transportation options between communities. So in 2020-21, during the pandemic, regional bus operators were hit hard. BC government provided support, including to Alberta-based Cold Shot, but Alberta did not. So did this ministry consider providing funding, very much like BC, and why was the decision made not to do so?
So we have certainly government has provided funding through small and medium enterprise relaunch funding program. In addition to it, as the Deputy Minister has indicated, we have launched back in 2018 the Rural Transit Pilot Program, and that's in the process of being completed, and then we'll be evaluating before a decision could be made in terms of the future plans for that. In spring 2021, province committed $350 million under the Small and Medium Enterprise Relaunch Grant Program. This program is administered by Jobs, Economy and Innovation Ministry and support businesses and employees affected by the economic disruption of the pandemic. Intercity bus operators were eligible under this program. Additional relief, including deferring the collection of corporate and education property tax for businesses.
Sorry, thank you very much. Just in the interest of time, I'm not really asking about the SMERG program or programs that were outside of your ministry, but I'm asking about transportation. So I'm going to move on. So can you compare fiscal year 2019-20 to 2020-21, and how many routes were cut by regional or rural private bus operators?
We have we have seen some immediate impact to some of the routes as a result of COVID. Many of the operators have resumed many of the routes, but not all of them because it depends on the condition and so on. We don't have the exact details of which routes have at this stage for me to share with you, which routes are not commenced
Yeah,
since the pandemic.
that's fine. I totally understand that. If you would agree to table that for this committee, that would be terrific.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. And do you have any estimate of the total amount of debt incurred by rural bus operators over fiscal 2020-21? And do you have a sense of the health and survivability of these operators?
We have certainly heard about some of these numbers that the local operators have provided. We have no way of verifying what those numbers are. In fact, we have encouraged these operators to go and seek programs that are available for them to eligible for to support that.
Excuse me, before my time runs out, I'm
lost.
just wondering if you could table for this committee any correspondence or recommendations that you've made to these operators?
We can table any communications that we have had with them.
Okay. And just one final question, maybe for the Deputy Minister. So there is a body, Premier's Council on Status of Persons with Disability. Has the Ministry of Transportation ever consulted this body in terms of how to be more inclusive or accessible?
Thank you, and I'll go over to the government side, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll just pick up where we left off there relative to traffic safety services, and it was higher than budgeted, but the same as it was the previous year. So maybe just an explanation of why it was lowered and why you wound up where you were at.
Sure. Thank you for that question. So you're correct. There was certainly a difference where we spent $4.5 million more in 2021 compared to budget. So that is largely a reflection of the implementation of our Safe Roads Alberta program that I discussed previously, which is really a diversion of most first-time impaired driving charges out of the court system and into a new administrative body for resolution. So that's resulted in a number of significant efficiencies for the court system. And really it's aimed at taking what we describe as high volume but low severity offenses that don't necessarily need to be clogging up court time, so that the courts can focus on more egregious matters, but also it's a significant time savings for the police. So that was a program that was launched in 2020-21. And in addition to that, we also supported a new grant program to support unemployed commercial carriers obtaining or unemployed individuals obtaining a Class 1 driver's license so they could enter into the commercial carrier industry. So as you may know, that Alberta is projecting a shortfall of commercial carriers in the coming years. And so we're very active in trying to find ways to fill that gap and also make the new mandatory entry-level training that came into effect in 2019 more affordable and accessible to those carrier groups. So that particular grant was a new expenditure in the year that was undertaken in year.
Okay, so it was, I guess I'd call it a bit of a surprise to you and an expenditure that you weren't planning on initially at the beginning of the year.
Right, at the beginning, we didn't budget for it. We were doing the work through the year to establish the program and seek the funding.
Very good. All right, well, that's good. Similarly, the Municipal Water Infrastructure Grant Program expenditure was about double. And I know in my own constituency, we benefited quite nicely. The Lloydminster got some money for their wastewater plant. Vermilion got theirs done. There was Wainwright got some for their lagoons, and our ACE Water project got the final batch of funding for completing that project. So I'm a pretty happy camper out in my area. But just wondering how it doubled or why that happened.
Sure. So as you know, as part of the focus on economic recovery, the ministry received a significant bump in stimulus funding that we were able to allocate to not only our own projects, but many of those grant-funded programs that we supply across the province. So there was $73 million more in the year compared to budget to do just that, to support the economic recovery and stimulus related to new municipal water projects. So of course that was an endeavor of not only injecting more funding into the economy, but certainly jobs as well. And maybe I will just ask ADM Tharmalingam to expand a little bit on the scope of those programs delivered or approved across the province.
You talk about Stip, right? Sorry, so we have two water grants program. One is Water for Life that actually focus on regional water lines, encourage people, municipalities to work together to come up with that. Or the other one is the Alberta Municipal Water Wastewater Program that actually helps in terms of addressing any standalone water treatment plants that needs to be done. The small and rural municipalities are eligible for this program, and it is to ensure that reliable and efficient water system and treatment facilities exist in municipalities. We are maintaining the funding for the water wastewater program as well as for Water for Life program. As for the expenditures in 2021, I can give you some numbers. That the budget 2021 had about $86.7 million paid to municipalities for 77 water treatment projects, and that pretty much covers it. If that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, it was just I was just wondering why there was, did this wound up being quite a bit more spending, especially when there was less federal grants that came through. So. And that kind of lends itself to my next set of questions relative to grants in conjunction with the federal government. So transportation infrastructure is an extremely capital intensive area of government spending, and it is a portfolio that falls into an area of shared jurisdictions. As such, there's no surprise that there are a number of joint grants that the province and the federal government administer. Page 23 of the annual report notes two such programs, the Public Transit, the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, or the PTIF, and the Investment in Canada Infrastructure Program, or ICIP. I'd like to better understand some of the mechanics behind these jointly administered programs a bit better. So how did the federal and provincial governments determine which programs got funding in 2020-21, particularly which order of government had the final say on programs a bit better? I want to understand who was the final decider.
Sure, thank you so much for that question. So as I think you mentioned, PTIF and ICIP are both federal programs. So ultimately, the federal government makes the final decision on approval of projects. But so for the role of the province, we try to work very closely with municipalities to ensure that their projects that are submitted would meet the criteria in order to garner approval from the federal government.
Okay, so in that case, so let's say the federal government chose not to fund something that we wanted to do here in Alberta. Is there, how did you manage that? Did you just park it and try to get it next year, or do you try to adjust funding? That's why I was wondering why the wastewater thing doubled while we got less grants from the federal government. So if you could just give me an idea how you manage those types of decisions.
Sure, and I'll actually ask Ranjit to provide some added detail, but certainly we have these federal programs that we try to help municipalities navigate the eligibility criteria to try to ensure their best success. In terms of that, we also have, when we talk about the doubling of the funding, we also had an injection into our own water grant programs that allowed us to spend more on providing municipalities direct funding, grant funding through the province rather than through the federal process. But in terms of projects that might be ultimately not approved by the federal government, I'll just ask Ranjit to talk a little bit about how we work with municipalities between the two levels of grants available to municipalities to try to ensure their best success.
Yeah, first, so this is Ranjit Dharmingam, ADM Transportation. So we do work very closely with municipalities in terms of understanding the project needs that they have. We actually closely work with them in terms of getting their application to the federal government. Any questions that come from the federal government when projects are submitted, we'll promptly work with the municipalities in terms of addressing those gaps so that we make every effort to make the application successful through federal government. That's our initial intent.
Thank you, ADM Tarmalingam. We will now move over to the fourth block for the official opposition. I have member Pancholi, I believe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My next question is also going to be about some specific projects, so these may be for ADM Lou. I'd first like to ask about the intersection at Highway 16A and Range Road 20. It's commonly known as Beach Corner around Spruce Grove and Stony Plain. It's an area of serious concern for a number of people in the community. I understand there was a fatal collision there in August, and there's currently a petition to improve this intersection with thousands of names on it. In fiscal year 2020-21, was there any work done to improve this intersection? Were any funds expedited to do work on this intersection? And of course, I'm not familiar. Maybe there is an intersection improvement priority list, and if so, where did this intersection fall on that priority list?
So I'm Tom Liu, Assistant Deputy Minister of Construction and Maintenance for the department. So thank you for the question. So this particular intersection is known to have a higher than quote unquote normal number of collisions, and has been identified within a department for future improvements. So as you're aware, and you had mentioned, there was a fatal accident that did occur in August of this year. So in 2017, we did do some improvements in the area to provide some additional signing for motorists to identify that this was an important intersection ahead, and they can anticipate some turning movements as they approach it. The particular intersection also had some work done to improve the illumination in the area. The intersection does have existing illumination, but as part of our LED program, we did replace the illumination to provide improved lighting in the intersection.
Thank you. So that work that was done in the 2020-21 fiscal year. Is that correct, what you just described?
So some of that illumination work would have been done in this current fiscal year.
Do you anticipate, given the collision that happened just earlier this year, is there more work that is planned for that intersection?
So we are doing an ongoing safety review on the intersection. We've completed a functional planning study on that intersection, and it is identified as a future project to basically remove the at-grade intersection and replace it with an interchange. But at this point in time, that's considered a future project, and it's not on the capital plan.
Okay.
But we continue to, as a result of that accident, and as you had mentioned, the number of citizens and stakeholders that have raised this concern to us, there's ongoing review of what we can do in the interim before the interchange is constructed.
Thank you. I appreciate that, ADM Lou. I'm going to move on to ask about Highway 881 and the 12-kilometer stretch between Gregoire Lakes and Lac Labish. The community is concerned about this highway and would like to see it twinned. And a few questions on this topic. As of March 31st, 2021, was there any associated funding in transportation to twin this section of the highway?
So you said as of March 31st, 2021?
Fiscal year. Yeah, this fiscal year.
Yes. So yes, we have engaged a consultant. We are continuing to work on the detailed design for the highway improvements on Highway 881. We're also looking at the pre-construction work that's required. So there is some land acquisition that we're looking at, and also the potential relocation of some affected utilities.
At this point in time, maybe, Emily, if you have a cost estimate for how much it would cost to twin this 12-kilometer section, if you could table that with this committee in terms of what the cost estimate is at this point, that would be appreciated.
Right. So just a correction. So there are no plans to twin 881 at this time. So the particular project that's on our capital plan is widening. So that would include some additional passing lanes and also a large rest area or a truck stop to allow the trucking industry to park overnight.
Okay,
So
thank you.
At this point, 881 is not slated for twinning.
Okay, thank you. Then if you could provide a cost estimate of the widening, as you've discussed, that would be appreciated as well. I'll move on to highways or roads that are controlled by Alberta Transportation that run through some smaller towns in Alberta, as we know that happens. So for example, the highways that run through High River or Labish, they are actually controlled by Alberta Transportation. I understand it's about only 400 meters of road in that community, but if you wanted to make improvements to it on that 400 meters of road, it is Alberta Transportation Road, they would have to go to require both a municipal permit to make modifications and a permit from transportation. So my first question is that correct? Is that within Labish or that runs through High River, there is a 400-meter section that runs to the sort of main street of the town that is actually owned by Alberta Transportation or operated by it?
So you are correct. So for provincial highways, where we control and manage the highway through that municipality, there is what we describe as the development control zone. So that development control zone is defined as within an 800-meter radius at the intersection of the provincial highway and another roadway crossing, and 300 meters from the edge of the provincial highway right away.
Thank you, Adriana. Sorry to cut you off. We've got short amount of time, so I'm just trying to get through all these questions. So why would a community need to go then? I understand it's controlled by transportation, but really you can understand that the administrative and, let's be honest, red tape challenge for the town having to actually go through Alberta Transportation to get permits.
So you're correct. So we have initiated the Highway Vicinity Management program where we are looking at eliminating the need for a lot of those routine type permits, particularly what you've talked about in Labish, where if you have a particular business or a dentist wants to put up a sign, some of those things are routine. And we have initiated a program with a voluntary program with municipalities where they can step forward and with the full intent of eliminating the need for a lot of those routine type permits.
So do you have so I appreciate that. So what was the average processing time during the fiscal year that's in question today to get a permit from the ministry right now for that year? What was the average processing time?
So we target for some of those permits to have them processed in about 4 weeks. Now, again, that's a little bit variable in some situations based on the volume of work and the priority of work. We also receive applications for subdivision developments, and those take priority over these routine type permit requirements. But
thank you, ADM. Sorry to interrupt. So it's just that does sort of contradict some of the things we were hearing from people in the community who were saying that it was taking up to a year to get some of these permits done. So in terms of the program you talked about, what is to eliminate some of this need for these permits? What is the timeline for implementation of that program?
So the implementation is underway. So we approached all of the municipalities throughout the province. It's a voluntary program. And I believe to date we have approximately 19 municipalities that have signed up. And so we are in the process of moving forward with each of those municipalities to identify certain types of permit applications, which we will basically exempt from approval.
Thank you. So in that area in Labish, was any work done to actually divest that road in question to Labish?
So that is something that we have also looked at. We fully understand the town of Labish would like to assume control and management of certain.
Thank you, ADM Lou. We will now move back for the final rotation on the government side. You have 9 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll just wrap up my question. There's on the PTIF and the ISIP we're talking about, and I'm just wondering if the ministry can provide an example of an approved project under one of these funding programs and perhaps the progress update to illustrate how quickly the funding was able to contribute to the approved project.
Sure. Thank you for that question. So certainly, and I think Ranjit covered it earlier when we talked about the COVID-19 resilience stream was adjusted under the federal grant programs to really help municipalities redirect some of the existing funding they had approved under those streams to deal with more immediate pressures from COVID-19. So an example of that project that would reflect that is accelerated approvals process enabled the town of Whitecourt to start and complete a retrofit of the Scott Safety Center ice plant that went from May to September of 2021. So this involved replacing and upgrading the existing ice plant with a new low volume ammonia system. So that certainly accelerated the ability for that work to be completed in a short amount of time.
Okay, well, great. Okay, I'll carry on now to connecting Alberta communities. Outcome number 3 of the annual report is, quote, connected and active communities. Albertans have inclusive and accessible transportation options in and between communities. Most Albertans require transportation beyond their own 2 feet at some point or another, and with such a large amount of land mass in our beautiful province, it's certainly becomes important that the ministry ensure that transportation needs are met. With that in mind, I would like to ask a few questions about how the ministry ensured this outcome was met in 2020-2021. Green Trip funding was one of the ways in which the ministry supported this outcome. So can the ministry provide more detail on the Green Trip funding and how it was allocated?
Sure. Thank you for that. So Green Trip is a program that provides one-time capital funding to municipalities to support new or expanded public transit. And the goal is that the transit is safe, affordable, and environmentally sustainable. So there was up to $2 billion made available for the duration of the program. So at this point, it is a fully committed program with signed grant agreements for all of the money available. So the capital projects funded under Green Trip give Albertans more options for public transit, as you mentioned, other than their own 2 feet, which certainly people will need something beyond that to get them around to things they need to do. So the purpose of the program really was to help decrease the number of vehicles on our roads, and of course, as a corollary consequence of that, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and certainly help promote Alberta's growth in a responsible, environmentally conscious way. So a total of 33 projects benefited from the $25.6 million spent in the current fiscal year that is under discussion today. These included LRT expansion and electric bus purchase in Edmonton, bus replacement and expansion in Lethbridge, transit infrastructure expansion in Spruce Grove, and transit storage and maintenance facility in Airdrie.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's those are all communities that are relatively close to large, or either are or close to major urban centers. I was just wondering, you know, when you try to talk about public transit in smaller communities, it just isn't viable. But I was just wondering, did the ministry have a mechanism to ensure that some of these funding dollars were directed to rural areas, and was that successful at all?
Sure. So we are certainly always conscious of the sometimes disparity that can occur between rural and urban centers when it comes to transit infrastructure and other things. So of the $2 billion allotted for that program, $400 million was allocated to rural areas, with the $800 million going to the two larger centers. So we certainly encourage municipalities outside of Calgary and Edmonton to apply for this funding that was available specifically to those rural areas. And then we also expanded the Green Trip to qualify for all eligible PTIF projects. So that would help municipalities get maximum support from both our program and the federally funded PTIF program.
So what kind of things did the rural people put their money to? Did they have buses, or what did they do? Little handy vans, or do you know those details?
Sure, maybe I will turn it over to Ranjit to discuss what sorts of things were funded under that for the rural area.
Yeah, so it varies depending on the municipalities. So we have had where bus maintenance facility could be in a somewhat larger community to having purchasing one bus for a transit service. So it varies depending on the community's needs. So whether it's a transit stop that need to be rehabilitated or built, or whether it's going to be actually purchasing a bus. So it depends on what it is. But yeah, many of them related to transit are eligible under this program. So we were able to make that work.
Okay, well, that's good news. And a little innovation on everyone's part. Outcome 3.2 on page 30 mentions the Rural Transportation Pilot Program. I know the pilot is scheduled to end in 2021-22, but as I know, the rural transportation is a significant issue. I'd like the Minister to provide an update on the implementation of the program in 2020-2021.
Sure, thank you for that question. So I can tell you that the bulk of those pilot projects wrapped up in 2020-21, with the exception of the MD of Spirit River, which was extended to conclude this fall. So two pilots, Camrose and Grand Prairie, I think that was mentioned earlier, were canceled at the request of the municipality due to low ridership, and we certainly assume that it was resulting from the impacts of the pandemic. One pilot in Medicine Hat also ended 2 months early at the request of the municipality for similar circumstances. So three pilots with Camrose, Ridger County, and the MD of Spirit River were completed on time, or a request to extend their pilot from their original timelines was granted. So we were very alive to the fact that the intention of the pilot program was certainly impacted by the pandemic, as most things were that we're aware of, and we certainly made efforts to adjust. And if extensions were requested, we allowed those to occur, because at the end of the day, we certainly, in looking to our evaluation work that will be occurring this year, we really need to consider how we will navigate through the impacts of the pandemic and what recovery might look like in a different scenario for those bus services going forward.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you think that they gave up on the program as a result of the pandemic? So I imagine it's hard to assess demand during a pandemic year, but was that kind of was that the main focus for canceling it early?
For those municipalities that stopped their pilot programs early, predominantly we were told, I mean, there was a number of things contributing to that. First of all, they were, by their very nature, potentially small projects to begin with. And then, of course, with the advent of COVID-19 protocols that had to be in place for people on transit system, further reduced the ability to accommodate maybe a full fleet of passengers on a particular route. So those were certainly impacts felt by those pilots in terms of the feasibility to continue with them.
Okay, great. Just wondering what the major lessons you learned from the pilots that you did do.
Sure. So as I mentioned, that we're certainly...
Thank you, Deputy. So now we'll move on to the fifth rotation, which is 3 minutes of each side to read questions into the record for the ministry to follow up on within 30 days. So I am looking at Member Renault, who would like to lead off, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question 1, can the ministry share with the committee the average cost to repave 1 kilometre of road in 2020-21? I appreciate each situation is different, but a working rule or equation is sufficient. Question 2, does the ministry have an assessment of the percentage of Alberta's road network owned by the province that is susceptible to extreme weather events like we've seen in BC? If so, for the proportion of the road network that is not up to modern standards, does the ministry have a working cost estimate of the amount required to bring the network up to standard? Question 3, the ministry does planning work at a high level cost estimate of the amount required to make the QE2 highway between Edmonton and Calgary 3 lanes in each direction, including the cost of reworking interchanges. Can the ministry please table with the committee the high-level cost estimate? Question 4, can the ministry explain why progress on projects under the federal grants program were slower than anticipated? If progress was limited due to COVID-19 pandemic, what steps did the ministry take in 2020-21 to ensure the projects will be completed in a timely manner? How is the ministry supporting Alberta's municipalities to complete their projects and address federal funding requirements, and are the financial implications associated with the delays? Question 5, twinning Ray Gibbon Drive. Can we get a status update, update on delays and any issues or permit problems? Next question, or question 6. According to the AG report, the Ministry of Transportation is required to follow public sector accounting standards, which include the reporting of environmental liabilities. What steps is the ministry taking to improve its reporting of environmental liabilities to ensure that it's meeting public sector accounting standards and government accounting policies? Is there a timeline for implementation? Question 7, what steps is the ministry taking to address the OAG concerns that transportation is in non-compliance with the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act? And does the ministry have a timeline to complete environmental assessments of contaminated sites under its jurisdiction? Question 8, the OAG reported that contamination continues to spread due to uncontrolled sources of contamination that transportation has not remediated or controlled. What are the financial, environmental, and human risks posed when contaminants are permitted to leach? Also, what steps is the ministry taking to ensure the safety of people and environment around these sites? And can the ministry please break this down by site? Question 9, according to the OAG, the ministry has not always informed or involved all landowners whose land is affected by contaminated sites. What plans, if any, did the ministry put in place to ensure that all parties affected by site contamination are appropriately notified? Question 10, OAG stated that the ministry suspended operating a groundwater recovery system for a period due to insufficient funding, increasing the risk of contamination spreading. What specific steps did the ministry take, if any, in 2020-21 to ensure that there is sufficient funding to maintain and operate groundwater recovery systems? And my last question, how will the ministry know if the elimination of the commercial vehicle and commercial carrier permits is achieving its desired results to streamline processes and reduce costs for carriers, whereby it hopes to save carriers time and money while still supporting the safe and efficient movement of goods across the province and drive economic growth? Does the ministry
Thank you. Member over to the government side for the reading portion, please.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions. Can the ministry please provide an update on the progress made to addressing the Office of the Auditor General's recommendation to improving processes to assess, estimate, and account for environmental liabilities? My next question is, can the ministry please provide an update on the progress made to addressing the Office of the Auditor General's recommendation to improving processes to ensure compliance with environmental legislation? Pass over, I guess, to MLC.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Throughout the annual report, rehabilitation of road is mentioned numerous times. Alberta's weather and the traffic generated by our industries certainly have an impact on the condition of our roads. But I'm wondering if the ministry can provide some insight into our road rehabilitation. What were the metrics used by the ministry in determining which roads receive the funding for rehabilitation? And how did the ministry include safety in its assessment of which roads needed rehabilitation? And what mechanisms did the ministry have in place to ensure that rehabilitation projects are of high enough quality for taxpayers to get value for their tax dollars? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. Thank you to the officials from the Ministry of Transportation for attending today and responding to our questions. And we ask that the outstanding questions be responded to in writing within 30 days and forwarded to the committee clerk. We have received our written responses, friends, from the Ministry of Service Alberta from our October 26th meeting. Those are on the committee public website per the ordinary practice of the committee, or they will be posted. Any other items for discussion? Seeing none, the date of our next meeting will be Tuesday, December 14th with the Auditor General of Alberta. Are those at the table, please take your items with you when you leave. And I will call for a motion to adjourn. Moved by the Deputy Chair, Reid. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That motion is carried, and we will see you on the 14th.